Please be seated. I love being back at All Saints. Whether or not you own me, I think I own you. I feel like I'm coming home. It's wonderful to be here with so many friends because I remember you were the first Children's Sanctuary Church, and I have shared that all around, and I see George Regas and Mrs. Regas and my dear friends John and Billy McGuire, and someone just the daughter of the Millers who come every year until they pass this past year to our Beat the Odds. But All Saints has been a part of our movement for children, and I'm deeply grateful. And you also helped us begin some of the first freedom schools in California. I want you to come back and do it more now. We have a wonderful, had last summer, a freedom school in Laverne Secure Probation Camp, and it was a smashing success. And I just hope that we can spread freedom schools everywhere and put children into a pipeline to college and career and work and not to prison. This is becoming a new American. But I'm glad to be home and to be here worshiping with you this morning. After President Kennedy's assassination, Dr. King wrote that it was time for our nation to do some soul searching. And he said while the question of who killed President Kennedy was important, the question of what killed President Kennedy was even more critical. Dr. King believed the answer was that our late president was assassinated by a morally inclement national climate. It is a climate filled with heavy torrents of false accusations, jousting winds of hatred, and raging storms of violence. It is a climate where men cannot disagree without being disagreeable, and where they express dissent through violence and murder. It is the same climate that murdered Medgar Evers in Mississippi, he said, and 6 innocent Negro children in Birmingham 50 years ago this year. Dr. King also said that the undercurrents of hatred and violence which made up this morally inclement climate were fueled by our cultural embrace of guns, by our readiness to allow arms to be purchased at will and fired at whim, by allowing our movie and television screens to teach our children that the hero is one who masters the art of shooting and the technique of killing. By allowing all of these developments, we have created an atmosphere in which violence and hatred have become popular pastimes. The same winds of hatred, storms of violence, and easy access to guns, and the glorification of guns that Dr. King believed killed President Kennedy would also kill Dr. King. On April 5th, 1968, in Cleveland, Ohio, after Dr. King's assassination, Robert Kennedy spoke about the mindless menace of violence in America, which he said again stains our land and every one of our lives. It is, he said, it is not, he said, the concern of any one race. The victims of the violence are black and white, rich and poor, young and old, famous and unknown. No one, Robert Kennedy said, no matter where he lives or what he does, can be certain who will suffer from some senseless action of bloodshed. And yet it goes on and on and on in this country of ours. Since Robert Kennedy spoke these words, he and another 1,300,000 American men, women, and children have been killed by guns. This is twice the loss of Americans within our own soil, and American against Americans, than all of the American deaths from battles and wars in our entire history, from the Revolutionary War through the Civil War and World War I and II. All the major wars that our nation has been engaged in. American against American, and American suicides against self. We need to talk about what is missing within ourselves, if this is the thing that we seem to do over and over again. Guns have lethalized our despair and anger and turned moments of emotional instability into tragic, permanent loss of lives. And while the heartbreaking massacre in Newtown, and before that in Aurora and Columbine, and the relentless violence we read about in the papers every day in our cities, in this state, and in Chicago, and Washington, D.C. at our Navy Yard. And the killing of children, which we thought, could never happen except to black children against each other. We need to galvanize not just the momentary outrage and the momentary shock, but we have got to do whatever is necessary to build a transforming movement to end the gun violence against all of us, but against our children. Gun violence against children as you will see from many of the materials out on your patio, the killing of children is not new. It has been a relentlessly unreported and underreported plague that kills or injures a child every half hour in our nation. Since 1963, guns have killed over 166,000 American children, which is, my goodness, more than we have lost, many more than we have lost in Afghanistan, Iraq, combined. More children die on American soil than our American battle casualties in wars abroad. The United States has as many guns as people. America's military and law enforcement agencies have 4 million guns. Our citizens have 310 million guns. American companies manufacture enough bullets each year to fire 35 rounds into every one of our citizens. A child, as we've said, dies from a gun now every 3 hours and 15 minutes. We've made progress. I was shocked in 1993 and 4 when we decided, when we were launching our Black Community Crusade for Children, to make sure we didn't know what was the prime concern in the black community, and to my absolute despair and surprise, it was gun violence. The young children and the young teens and the parents both named gun violence as the #1 concern. I didn't know that. I thought it was education, I thought it was health care, I thought it was lack of early childhood. And that began what is now in we're now in our 23rd year of doing our child gun violence reports, and you have the most recent one out on your tables. But they just didn't think they'd live to adulthood. It was a scourge. So we did another issue like a hole in the head, but we began these gun violence reports. We have made progress. At that time, 15 children were dying every day. To now, it's about 7.5 children dying every day, but it is still a moral obscenity that we must raise up and stop. And many people thought that it only happened to other people's children, or it only happened to black children, Latino children. But after Newtown, we should all get the message that none of our children, however young, in any place in their schools, homes, or streets, are safe. It's time to stop the killing of children, and for us to love our children as much as some people love their guns. We have to have the same level Children and teens in our nation are 17 times more likely to die from gun violence than children in 25 other high-income countries combined. What is the matter with us? The children and teens who died from guns in the most recent year would fill 134 classrooms of 20 children each. Every year, guns kill more preschoolers than law enforcement officers in the line of duty. Is this what we mean by putting children first in our nation? I hope we will change these values. The number of children and teens killed by guns in the most recent year was 5 times the number of U.S. soldiers killed in action that year in Iraq and Afghanistan. We have got to begin to pay attention to the war here at home. And among black children, because while gun violence overall of children and teens went down, black males have just gone through the sky. And the number of black children and teens killed by guns over the last 50 years is 17 times greater than all the recorded lynchings of black people that went on from 1882 to to 1968, and I've been saying to all of us, but I've been saying to the black community, where is our anti-lynching movement? Because this has become the new lynching movement of our years. If we don't break up this gun violence and the cradle-to-prison pipeline, which victimizes the black child, that was born in 2001, 1 in 3 black boys born in 2001 and 1 in 6 Hispanic boys born in 2001 are going to be funneled into this cradle-to-prison pipeline. And it's becoming the new American apartheid, and it's a new resegregation device. And we must wake up and make sure that we do not let mass incarceration become the new apartheid in America and turn back the clock into a second post-Reconstruction era. I get very, very scared when I look at the patterns of what's happening in our country. And we've been run a little bit crazy by some of us, by having a black president in the White House, by the changing demographics, which means that our babies are already a majority born this year, black and Latina. Many people are very upset about the political process, and we see all the political measures, voter suppression measures and redistricting measures, but we really need to wake up because there really is a concerted effort to move us back. And I used to think I was paranoid over the last few years, but some of my historian friends said, no, we are in danger of being where we were, and we're like in 1912 or 1913. The only constant is change, and we must stay vigilant. Dr. King warned us in the last years of his life, when he was fairly depressed, about what he considered the dangers. He said he would do it all over again, of trying to push for integration and inclusion of everyone in American society. But he said he feared that we were integrating into a burning house that was infected by excessive materialism, excessive militarism, excessive racism. And people who heard him at this particular gathering were rather shocked and said, what must we do? And he says, we must all become firemen and sound the fire alarm. And we should all wake up and make sure that we don't find our children being left to fight the same battles that we struggled so valiantly, and so many of you and others did, and sacrificed so much for, to bring about a breakdown in racial segregation in the country. We have got to have honest discussions about the wonderful dream that we had embodied in the Declaration of Independence, but we also have to have an honest discussion about the enormous birth defects that crippled that dream and that we have been struggling to do. While we had the right recognition that everybody was created before God with certain inalienable rights, we then translated that, unfortunately, into Native American genocide, because the money and the control of the economic system seemed to override that. And so we really need to struggle with the fact that our founding birth defects were grounded in Native American genocide, in slavery, in the exclusion of all women from the democratic process, and the exclusion of all non-propertied men, including white men. And we have valiantly struggled over the years and decades, and even participated in the Civil War, and then had to go through a post-Reconstruction era, and then a civil rights movement, and here we are again with an enormous spurt in progress, with a black president in the White House after second terms. But don't take it for granted, because the forces of regression are there. And if I combine that cradle-to-prison pipeline with the fact that 66% of all of our children in all racial and income groups cannot read or compute at grade level, and 80%, almost 80% of our Latina and 80% of our black children can't read or compute in 8th grade at grade level, what is a child gonna do if you have no education in this globalizing world? We're sentencing them to absolute social and economic death. And if one combines that with the poverty that we let our children suffer, they are the poorest group of Americans, and the younger our children are, the poorer they are. I can't think of anything dumber than to let your preschool children in the years of early childhood development go without the school readiness supports that they need. But if you look at miseducation, if you look at the violence, if you look at the prison pipeline, and you look at who our child population is and will be, we have got to bring about a major transformation through a major transforming movement. And we can and must do it, but we must stay alive, and we must stay alert, and we must come together and end the violence of poverty. We must end the violence of ignorance and make sure that we reclaim our heritage. We went through a wonderful period after the Civil War, and we went through another wonderful period after the Civil Rights Movement, but we're at risk of losing it all unless we open up and do and finish the next phase of making America, America. What can we do just on gun violence? I think there's a broad consensus, even among gun owners and NRA members, that we should have a national background check system, and that we should have a ban on all these assault weapons, which have nothing to do with hunting and nothing to do with protecting your house, and that we should be dealing with these high-impact ammunition clips. And I think we should not be dismayed. We just have to stay at it and at it and at it until we begin to turn the tide. And after Newtown, even though the reforms have not been enough, the fact that the Ohio legislation, the Colorado legislation, California has made progress in beginning to have more common sense gun safety laws, is something we just should continue. I am disappointed, obviously, with our Congress, but we just have to relentlessly stay alive and wear them down. I love the widow parable in Luke with the unjust judge who didn't care anything about her, but she just kept coming, give me justice. And she wore him down even though he didn't care anything about it, and eventually he did. And I think that we should just remember that widow and become a pest that just worries them to death until it's easier for them to enact the gun laws that we want. So when you want to kind of give up, you just remember that old widow in Luke and just get on back out there and hold your leaders accountable. Every year we do an annual gun violence report, but we also do an annual children's defense budget and an annual how your members of Congress vote. Hold them accountable. They need to hear from you. And perseverance, perseverance, perseverance is absolutely crucial to building movements and to having a cumulative development of enough voices that can overwhelm the biggest opposition. I love a little children's book that I always quote a lot called The Carrot Seed by Ruth Krauss. I don't know if any of you have ever read it, but it reminds me when I get real tired in Washington, but there's this little boy who planted a carrot seed, and his mother said, "I'm afraid it won't come up." And his father said, "I'm afraid it won't come up." And his big brother said, "It won't come up." But every day the little boy pulled up the weeds around the seed and sprinkled the ground around the seed with water, but nothing came up, and nothing came up. And everyone kept saying it wouldn't come up, but he still pulled up the weeds around it every day and sprinkled the ground with water. And then one day a carrot came up, just as the little boy knew it would. And what we've got to do is to believe in God's transforming power through our hands and our feet and our voices and our votes. We just have to keep at it, keep watering, keep pulling up the weeds, keep insisting. The paradigm will split. Look at the miracle of the civil rights movement from people who just wanted their children to have a better life. They had far fewer resources than we had. If they could do what they did with so little to transform 200 years of American apartheid, we can do what we have to do to make sure that every child is safe within our country, and that every child is free from the poverty that afflicts 1 in 5 children in the richest nation on earth. It's obscene as we now go through this period of growing child poverty and our leaders cutting food and taking food away from hungry children while the rich are getting richer and we have near record levels of wealth and income equality. We can't tolerate that. We just must constantly say we want to go another way, and we can achieve that, but it has to come from people like you. I want to just end with a few lessons from Noah's Ark that I tell a lot because my family are pack rats, and my sister sent me this clipping by an anonymous sage a few years back on everything you need to know in life you learn from Noah's Ark. And the first lesson of the Ark was don't miss the boat. And America is going to miss the boat. We should constantly say what the prophets tell us we got to do about justice and what the Gospels say we must do about justice. But we should also just remind people of our self-interest. If you've got a majority of all of your children in this globalizing world not able to read and write, and work for us and become the new military and economists and political leaders of the new century, we're going to miss the boat. And I don't know why we can't seem to get it. 74% of our 17 to 24-year-olds cannot get in the military because they have either a prior incarceration record, they have health problems that are, obesity problems, or they are not able to read and write at the levels that will permit them in. We're not going to have a strong military. We're not going to have a strong workforce. And I think it's really dumb for states, including California, is paying 4 times more per prisoner than a public school student. But our states on average are spending 2.5 times more per prisoner. I want those children working for me. I don't want us to be working to support them in a prison situation and without the skills to come back out and not be mad at all of us. And so we're going to miss the boat. Our greatest national and military security problem doesn't come from any enemy without. It comes from our inability and unwillingness to invest in all of our children. We're going to miss the boat if we don't invest in our children and love our children. Second thing is remember that we're all in the same boat. And there are a lot of people who think these Black and Latino children don't have anything to do with them. Well, they're already, as I've indicated, a majority of all babies, and they're going to be a majority of all of our children by 2019. We need them to be educated so that the country can be strong. Tomorrow is today, and that was the third lesson, was to plan ahead. And to remember that it wasn't raining when Noah built the ark. And tomorrow really is today, and we are also preoccupied with the next quarter's profit, that we're missing the boat to that future that we've got to preserve. The fourth lesson from Noah's Ark, because everybody thought he was crazy listening to this, whatever he called God, to build this ark, was that, don't be afraid of being criticized or being viewed as stupid or crazy. If you don't want to be criticized, don't do anything, don't say anything, and don't be anything. And for those of us who are in faith, again, just keep doing what our faith dictates that we do to bring about a more just society. And my favorite was, remember that the Ark was built by amateurs. The Titanic was built by experts. We cannot... Is that a great... Do not wait for our political leaders in Washington to solve these problems. It is parents and empowering our young people. It is empowering our faith congregations to stand up. Movements come from the bottom. They come from the disenfranchised. They come from the hurting. They come from the caring. And so you have the future of this country and of our children in your hands, and we should just get about the business of transforming America. And Ed Bacon and this church have been so helpful in that. But we've got to get out of our comfort zones. And we've got to do it now. We have got to make a big ruckus and a big noise, and we've got to persevere, persevere, and persevere. And one day, you will see the kind of change. I heard Dr. King at Spelman's Compulsory Chapel, and I remember 2 things that he said, and I repeated in almost every audience. It was the first time I ever heard him. I was 20 years old, and he said, first, take the first step, even if you can't see the whole stairway, and leave the results to God. Don't try to figure out everything. Just do what is right, and make sure you do what you can, where you are, with what you have, and that is important. And the second thing he talked about was the absolute importance of moving forward. And we've got to move forward. We can't go back to where we've come. And he said, if you can't fly, you drive. If you can't drive, you run. If you can't run, you walk. If you can't walk, you crawl. But you keep moving forward. And that is, I think, my bottom line message. We must move forward. We must end child poverty. Dr. King and Robert Kennedy's last campaign was a poor people's campaign 45 years ago this day, and that is the parent organization of the Children's Defense Fund. It's time for us to finish that campaign, because race and economics are inextricably intertwined, and we must make a commitment to ending poverty in the richest nation on earth, and to begin with our children. And next year, I hope we can all work together on one big thing, and that is making sure that President Obama's proposal, which is called Strong Start, has been it's been introduced into the Congress, for $90 billion in mandatory money to put into place a high-quality early childhood system beginning at birth with home visiting, early Head Start, child care, universal pre-K, and I wanted to go through kindergarten because we're about to have Common Core standards beginning in our states, and a lot of children are coming to school not even knowing their real names or not knowing their colors or their alphabets, and it's going to widen the achievement gap further. But if we can make that down payment on a long overdue coherent system, it's the best poverty prevention measure that we could take. It's time to end child poverty in rich Americans. So we are going to be asking you to help to become an incredible pest with all of your local leaders. And don't let them tell you that we don't have the money. We don't have a money problem in America. We have a profound values and priorities problem. And it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of effort. I know I'm over my time. I'm just going to end because I hadn't planned to do this. But I saw John McGuire and others, and I still miss my friend Bill Coffin at Riverside. And a friend told me a story that may or may not be true, so sometimes she can be very imaginative, but at any rate, she told me a story about being at Riverside in the Advent season and in New York, and the Christmas pageant was underway. And it had come to the point at which the innkeeper was to turn away Marian and Joseph with the resounding line, "There is no room in the inn." The innkeeper was played by Tim, who was an earnest youth with Down syndrome who had only one line to remember: "There's no room in the inn." And he had practiced it again and again, and with his parents and with the pageant director, and seemed to have mastered it. So Tim stood up at the altar, bathrobe, costume firmly belted around his fulsome stomach, and Marian and Joseph made their way down the center aisle. They approached him, said their lines as rehearsed, and waited for the reply. Tim's parents, the pageant director, and the whole congregation almost leaned forward as if willing him to remember his line. "There's no room in the inn," Tim boomed out, just as rehearsed. But as Marian and Joseph turned on cue to travel further, Tim suddenly yelled, "Wait! You can stay at my house." And the congregation all looked at him in astonishment. And he said again, "You can stay at my house." Our friend Bill Coffin strode to the pulpit, my friend said, who was there, said amen, and sat down. It was the best sermon he never preached. America needs to stop preaching. We need to find room in the inn for every one of God's children that is safe and loving and hopeful. And that is what I hope we will remember in this Advent season. Lovely to be here.